Very good afternoon to all. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to this 1 month gender sensitization program. Participants, kindly mute your audio and turn off your video for better network connection. If you have any queries, post in the chat box. Don't present yourself during the session. Attendance will be posted in the chat box at the end of the session. May I now request Professor N. Manimegalai, Dean Faculty of Arts, Director and Head, Department of Women's Studies, Bharatidasan University, Trichy, to welcome and introduce the resource person to the gathering. Welcome you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Neela. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone here who are participating the 1 month long gender sensitization program on the theme gender, society, economy, and polity. And I'm doubly happy to have today's resource person, Professor Somita Sen, who is a well-known, nationally, internationally well-known feminist scholar. And I'm happy to welcome you, Sumita, for this fourth day session. And as far as the participants are concerned, they are all drawn from all over the country. And Northeast, most of them are represented from Northeast universities also. And teachers from women's studies and also other social sciences are attending. So it's a good opportunity for us, being women's studies scholars, to take forward the gender sensitization to the other discipline faculty, scholars, and students. So with this, I'm privileged to really introduce our friend, the resource person today, Professor Sumita Sen, and who is, I already pointed out that she is a well-known scholar, not only here in India, but even in other countries also. So it's an internationally known feminist scholar. And she's currently with a fellowship called Mary Harmsworth Professor in Imperial and Naval History. She received her PhD from Cambridge University in 92 and was JRF at Trinity College in during 1994. And she taught both at Calcutta University and Jadavpur Universities from 94 to 2018. Such a long period of teaching experience. And during this period, she served as the first founder vice chancellor of Diamond Harbour Women's University between 2013 and 2015. So started from the scratch and in establishing the institutions right from the scratch as a new institution. How challenging it is, we all know. So she did that challenging task and delivered her whatever possible to her end. And she was also the Dean Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies at Jadavpur University from 2016 to 2018. That is again a very prestigious position. When she was the Dean, she definitely influenced the policies. Of course, it was called School of Women's Studies there, and they have a center, the department, etc. in Jadavpur University. And one of her contributions, her monograph, Women and Labor in Late Colonial Period, Cambridge University Press 99, won the Raver Reserve Prize in Commonwealth History. That is also a prestigious award she got to her credit, and the kind of the book, the quality of the book. And she has published extensively on gender and labor. Her specialization is colonial South Asia, but she has also done contemporary interdisciplinary research on issues such as domestic violence and labor in the informal sector. Very, very important and need-based areas which are really required. Even in the COVID pandemic context, we are supposed to work on, definitely do some research, and she will be talking on those issues. And she also edited a book, Global South, which was published in Cephis magazine, on the first online journals and South-South platform from young scholars from 2004 to 2014, 10 long years. And recently her two books were published in 2016. One was on Domestic Days, Oxford University Press, and The Passage to Bondage, very important, another important area, by Soumya. She has been active in the women's movement as a woman person. On one side, she is an academician, very strong academician, theoretician, feminist scholar. On the other hand, she has also been associated with the movement, not necessarily here in India and internationally also. She participated in both the government and non-government fora of Beijing, the Fourth World Women's Conference held at Beijing, where we had the kind of the discussions and how the status of women has to be reflected. And we had series of initiatives here in Government of India also. So such a renowned, eminent resource person is with us today, and I'm really happy that she could find time to accept and be with us today to interact on a very important topic. In fact, she is supposed to be there in London, and thanks to COVID, she could not get her flight on the time, and therefore she is held up here. Otherwise, she would have been an international scholar. But definitely, even if she, actually, I was thinking that she would be in London, and I called her, and she readily agreed. So thanks for that to Sumita, and she was also the IAWS president some couple of tenure back, and so in that capacity also we interact very much. So welcome, Sumita. Now over to you, Sumita. You can go for about 3:20 or so, and then leave 10 minutes for discussion.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your nice introduction. May I now request Professor Zamita Sen, former Vice Chancellor, Diamond Harbour Women's University, former Director, School of Women's Studies, Jadavpur University, Kolkata, to take over the session. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today. And I'm very happy to hear that there are people from Northeast participating in this event. I'm sure there are many people I've met, and I know I was there at the Guwahati IAWS conference, and I met many people at that conference. So I'm really happy to meet everybody again, though in this funny way, through the screen, but you know, that is what is left to us, and at least that is left to us. So we should perhaps count our blessings. Today's topic is kind of a punch that I've made between issues that have grabbed national eyeballs in the past month or two on migration, since the lockdown in late March. And another, I think two issues have emerged in this lockdown period as major public discussions, which are new in terms of public discussion. So these are not new phenomena, but these are phenomena that have not been in public discussion. One is migration, and the other is domestic workers, paid domestic workers. So what I'll do today in this brief talk is to try and put these two together. Okay, let me just calculate my time for 1 minute. So it's 2:40 and you want me to speak till 3:20, which is 40 minutes. Okay. So this pandemic that has broken early in 2020 is, I think, very importantly perceived by all of us, perceived socially as a major watershed. And we express that sense by some words that have now, new words that have become household words. One of those words that grabs my attention, that attracts my attention, is the notion of the new normal. So what in the new normal is new, and what is it that is normal? It is a very paradoxical kind of term, and I like paradoxes. So I will say that what the new normal does, and why that term is a paradox, is because in fact it throws us into a situation that is paradoxical. It's a moment of paradox. Why? Firstly, it has contrary tendencies. What does quarantine, lockdown, what is the term that is now being used? Self-isolation. isolation. You are a single person, you're isolating yourself. So there is an atomizing impact of the pandemic. But along with this, paradoxically, in the opposite, we have a sharp lesson in interdependence. We have learned that individual behavior, social consequences, and community welfare are intimately connected. That our one person's mistake can be socially extremely costly. Now, this is a contrary process to the neoliberal impulses of individualization we have had in recent years. And the one politics that had kind of pointed this out to us very sharply was environmental politics. It had told us that our individual behavior, plastic, this, that, carbon footprint, our lifestyle, our behavior today affected the whole society, our children in the very long term. But this pandemic is something different because the climate change had many immediate impact also, but by and large the consequences were long term. So the mistakes you're committing today are not going to immediately impact on you. They're going to have long-term impact. But this is different because it's immediate. It is life and death. It is a mistake, an individual transgression of the rules today can cause untold damage of human life. Now, this, I think, is a very new relationship between the self and society with which we are faced today. So, this, I think, is the overarching paradox of the moment. But under this overarching paradox, we have some other smaller paradoxes. And one paradox is that of mobility, which is what I have given the title of the talk with, which is because this whole lockdown thing is so evocative of immobility. And yet, paradoxically, what did lockdown do? On 25th March, when lockdown was announced, immediately within the next few days, we witnessed a mobility which we have never witnessed before. Migration came center stage on our agenda. It acquired a public visibility that it had not done for historically ever, or perhaps it did in very, very traumatic and exceptional circumstances. So what made this moment such an important moment for visibility of migration? Two things. One is that people walked. Now, there is no doubt that historically migration in India has involved people walking. People have walked, people still walk. But this spectacle of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people walking thousands of miles is contrary to the self-image of modernity. And that number and that desperation. So both the scale of the mobility and that desperation testified in people walking thousands of miles. Those two together created a visibility for migration that we have never seen before. So, a state policy that is aimed at immobilizing people has the paradoxical impact of creating an unprecedented mobility historically never seen before. What did we call this? What did newspapers, so journalists, scholars, all kinds of media became obsessed with these images of walking migrants? And this, the visibility achieved a peak on 8th May when 16 migrant workers were um, run over and died on a railway track. And this grabbed middle class imagination in a way it had never done before, even though, of course, the middle class is the consumer of migrant workers' labor. We use it every day. We should be aware that there is a huge phenomenon of migration, but we are not. And it took something like this, it took human tragedy on a grand scale for our middle classes to realize that our cities are constituted by migration. Uh, and scholars as well as newspapers gave this the headline reverse migration. So people had come to the city. Now this is reverse migration. People from the city are returning to the village. Some people said that this is an irreversible reverse migration. That is to say that these people who are going back to the village now will never come back. Why? Because the city had proved so inhospitable. In May, we had an article in EPW which said that this return to the village involved a radical loss of trust, so that in fact these are workers who will not return to the city. In fact, though, that is not quite correct, because within a few weeks of this, within a few days of the events in May, it became very clear that people returned from the reverse migration. So people went back to the city from the village. And these numbers were small in the beginning, but they began to increase. How do we understand this? And I think we should understand this historically. Historically, the form that migration has taken in India is not unilinear migration. Unilinear migration characterized industrialization in many parts of the world, where people came from village to city, they became urbanized, they remained in the city. In India, this did not happen. In the South Asian pattern of rural-urban migration has never been a unilinear migration. It has taken rather the form of circulation. So people move between village and city, and they continue to move between village and city. So the notion that the inhospitability of the city in a situation of pandemic will create a radical loss of faith, of trust, and that people will return to their village never to come back to the city is a historical misunderstanding of how migration has happened in India. In fact, if we compare this, and very appropriately compare this to the plague in Bombay, which happened in late 19th century, we will see exactly the same thing. The plague in Bombay lasted for almost a decade, for 9 years. And we saw a similar phenomena. When it first broke out, we had a huge exodus out of Bombay, people returning to their villages. But over a period of time, people returned to, and that, in fact, that exodus from Bombay created major changes in the labor market in Bombay. Some research has been done, for instance, on the impact of the plague on the Bombay cotton textile industry in that period. But there's been very little work on the impact of epidemics on urban labor markets. So we can't give you a connected story. But if we compare what happened in late 19th century in Bombay to what happened in 2020 in the whole of the world, and in India in particular, we see very common, very similar features. Now, within this pattern, within this historical pattern of circular movement, rural-urban movement of labor, there is a gender difference. And this is a very significant historical point which has often been missed in migration literature. Unlike men, women were not in circulation. So there are two kinds of women who migrate. There are women who migrate with families as part of their family, part of family migration, and there are single women who migrate. Family migration follows similar patterns, but family migration, rural-urban family migration is historically less significant. Even today, single migration is numerically more than family migration. So single women migrants were not circular migrants. Unlike men who could come to the city and return to the village, women, when they came alone to the city, rarely had the option of returning to the village. So for women, urban migration, single women's urban migration was usually an atypical migration in the South Asian context. It was unilinear migration. This has changed now. And this change is something we have not mapped very much because there has been very, very little research on it. In a piece of fieldwork that I did a couple of years ago, we captured some of this change, but we need to do much more fieldwork in order to understand fully the range of change that has been happening. So what have we found? We have found that in fact now, single women also participate in this circular pattern of migration. Not only two major changes. One is that family migration itself has increased. So women are part of family migration and their role in that kind of migration therefore has also increased. But also single women's migration has increased, and not only increased, single women's migration follows the same circular pattern, or some of single women's migration follows the same circular pattern that men's single migration has historically done. So in this pandemic and in this so-called reverse migration, we have therefore seen images as much of women and children as we have seen of men. And that is actually something, that is a change that we need to note. It is new in the way migration has normally happened has historically happened in the Indian context. Now, these migrants that we have suddenly realized inhabit our cities in such very, very, very large numbers. The question is, what do they do in the city? And one of the gender pattern is very clear in terms of the male preponderance in the construction industry, which is number one. So if you were to rank in order of numbers, the kind of work migrants do in the city, that first is construction. Construction work, men dominate, but women also participate. There's some proportion of women, but it is dominated by men. The number two occupation of migrants in the city is domestic work, paid domestic workers. And by estimates vary because this is an informal sector occupation. There is no record, so there is no accurate estimate of how many domestic workers there are in Indian cities, but estimates now range from 30 to 50 million. So we are talking of a very, very large constituency of workers. Now let me move then my focus from migration to domestic work. Again, I go back to the lockdown, the pandemic and the lockdown. What in essence does the lockdown do? In a sense, the lockdown ratchets up an unprecedented importance of the domestic. Historically, industrial capitalism in the West to start with, but all over the world, one of the many significant things it does, one of the things it does is to divide the public and the private. It creates the separation of spheres between the public and the private. And it not only creates this separation, it also has a secular movement of activities from the private to the public. So first, production goes out of the domestic and into the public sphere. Slowly, one by one, reproductive activities also start going out of the private sphere into the public sphere. And gradually the focus of our economies, our polities, our societies, all the things we are discussing in this series of lectures, all this moves from the private domain to the public domain, leaving very little in terms of social activities to the private domain. But suddenly, what the lockdown has done is halt this process. Indeed, not only halt it, to reverse it. So we are all now abandoning the public spatially in terms of activity and returning to the domestic. So I am today talking to you from my home. You are all listening to me sitting in your home. So we have all suddenly abandoned the public to return to the domestic. So this is in fact a very, so what are we saying? I mean, even spatially, we are saying the slogan of this pandemic is stay home, stay safe, right? Stay home. So the home then, after many years, after many centuries in some parts of the world, has returned to the focus of our everyday, the bulk of our activities. There are issues, as Manimeka Lai pointed out in her introductory comments, that domestic violence has become a new issue in that changed context. But there are many other issues that have emerged as well. And there are two issues that I will discuss today. But before I do that, let me give you a very potted 3-minute history of domestic work that I think helps us understand some of these issues. Now, the Indian middle class, as we know it today, emerged from colonial period. What happened in the colonial period? The middle class identity, particularly the urban middle class identity that emerged in that period, was very strongly premised on paid domestic workers. Why do I say that? Now, if we take my work is primarily on Bengal, so let me tell you how this happened in Bengal. In 19th century colonial Bengal, there was a new class that emerged, which was the colonial elite, the upper castes who entered the new professions and new employment offered by colonial state. These people became defined by their abjuration, their rejection of manual work. And this led to historians having termed the self-term was Bhadralok, and historians have also taken that term. The difference not between middle classes and working classes necessarily, but between the Bhadralok and the Chotalok, a status differentiation based on the performance of manual labor. Now, when the Bhadralok, lok is by gender male, when you had the female analog of the Bhadralok, which is the Bhadra Mohila, you had a very similar process happening there. So what happened if the Bhadralok said, look, I will not do manual work, the Bhadra Mohila also said, I will also not do manual work. So the Bhadra Mohila was defined by housework, housewifery, and motherhood. And we know that in the late 19th and early 20th century, particularly from Konika Sharkar's path-breaking, pioneering work, we know that this housewifery and motherhood was coded in cultural nationalism, and that the nation provided a context for the glorification and aestheticization of housewifery and motherhood. But this housewifery and motherhood, both housewifely work and motherhood work, as you know, is work. And a lot of it is manual work. But the Bhadra Mohila took only a part of that work as their own and relegated the manual part of that work to domestic work, to paid domestic workers. So the very identity of the Bhadra Mohila, the identity of the middle class woman, became premised on, became dependent on the hiring of domestic workers. Now this is happening all over India in this period, but it is happening more in Bengal than in the rest of India. From when census began in 1881, and if you look at the number of domestic workers recorded by census, then Calcutta always had the highest number of domestic workers among major cities of India. But in this period, domestic work was not a female occupation. In fact, more men were domestic workers than women were domestic workers. The feminization of domestic work began in the 1920s. In the 1920s in Bengal and in the 1930s in the rest of India. But when I say feminization, I don't mean in this period that there were more women than men. The number of women began to increase, the number of men began to decrease. It is only in the 1970s that you actually get women outnumbering men as domestic workers. So the feminization of domestic work to mean that women outnumber men in domestic work is actually very recent. So domestic work then, once it is feminized, it represents very uniquely. You don't have in India very many sectors where you see this, a class relationship directly, an employment relationship directly between women. So a woman employer and a woman worker. Now this, it is in this context that I'll make the 2 points that I said I will make. First is that what does the pandemic do to these household situations in which you have domestic workers? You have two different kinds of things happening. Where you have live-in domestic workers, you have often had domestic workers locked into the households, into the employer households. So women have been unable to return home. They have been locked down in the employer household. This has meant for some of them huge escalation in workloads, all kinds of psychological effects, etc., etc. But this we can discuss if you wish, its consequences later on. The more dramatic thing that has happened is with part-time domestic workers. Women who come from nearby locations into middle-class homes on a daily basis. They come for a few hours every day. Now, these women, because of a variety of reasons, including surveillance of middle-class neighborhoods, they have been unable to come to the employer households. Now, this is interesting to me because I'm a labor historian, and I know that it would never have been possible, or it will have been a long time before it was possible for domestic workers to go on a national strike of the order to which this withdrawal of labor has happened. So if the withdrawal of labor normally happens through labor organization, through strikes, which, because of the informal, oppressed nature of the domestic worker sector, could not have happened in the near future. But this pandemic has artificially created a situation where you have a wide withdrawal of women's, of domestic workers' labor from middle-class households, involuntary withdrawal. Now, this has brought to fore two things which we people who have worked on, who have done research on domestic workers already knew, but it's interesting to see this play out. One is that gender and generational relations in Indian households have survived change because of cheap domestic labor. In the West, after the Second World War, because domestic workers became so expensive, ordinary middle-class households could no longer afford to employ domestic workers. So there was suddenly a very big, and in the 1970s when women began to go out to work, then there was this big question of housework sharing. How do members of the family share housework? In India, housework sharing has never been an issue because the housework that a woman does not do, nobody else in the house does. It is a paid domestic worker who does that work. So the substitution of domestic work between the mistress, the housewife, the mother, is with paid domestic worker and not with other members of the household in middle-class households. So this is, an important and interesting issue that suddenly became very, very visible when domestic workers suddenly vanished. The other thing that has come into, one interesting possibility that emerges from this happening is that middle-class households become more aware of their dependence on paid domestic workers. Whether this will lead to better conditions for paid domestic workers or not, we don't know. But there is no harm in hoping. And indeed, it is an opportunity for activists who are trying to organize domestic workers, who are trying to improve the conditions of their lives, to in fact um, leverage this situation to try and fast forward some of their demands. But while this silver lining is visible, there is always a cloud in a silver lining. And what is that cloud? That there is this regulation of domestic workers in middle class, of entry and exit in middle class locations, neighborhoods, houses, apartments, gated communities, whatever you wish to call them. And that there is therefore a renewal of the stigmatization of domestic workers. And this became very clear. I don't know how many of you followed an advertisement for a dough maker issued by Kent. Have you seen that? I don't know if you've seen the advertisement. The advertisement is broken in half. On one side, there is a machine making atta, and that is nice and white. And then on the other side, there is a domestic worker kneading atta, and that is slightly gray. So it's polluted, it's dirty. So you overlay caste with race, with stigma, with, what have you, to create a very new narrative about domestic workers. There was huge opposition to this ad, and Kent very wisely withdrew it within a few days. So you can't see it now. I don't know if it's there on YouTube. But there is then both a danger and a possibility. We are at the cusp in terms of which direction paid domestic work sector may go. It may become more marginal, more stigmatized, and therefore more oppressive working conditions, or the middle class may realize their dependence on the paid domestic workers, and this may lead to better bargaining position and slight improvement in their working conditions. Both these are possible today in this moment of paradox. I will obviously hope that the good effect comes into being, but the social scientist in me is not very optimistic. So I will stop there, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Samita, for that very comprehensive note on the two important issues, and it was very much informing us the kind of historical place on which the very interesting how the very emergence of domestic work there in Bengal, it actually emerged. So we could get some insights right from the, we started with the paradox of overarching and these pandemic and the paradoxes, and move to two important areas, the migrant workers and their issues, and what would be the kind of the impact in the new normal context, and also elaborated on the domestic worker context. And in fact, we only wish that there will be some kind of developments, progressive, though you said being a social scientist, you are not optimistic, but still we only hope that there will be a new normalcy, new kind of positive developments in the working conditions. In fact, I would share here, I am also working on the same kind of workers, because this is a study on sanitation for women workers in the both in the formal and informal sector, wherein both the construction workers and the domestic workers were covered. And it would have been known to you, also informed to you, In some of the households, during menstruation, the women are not allowed to come with loss of pay. That 5 days of absence is not being paid by the employers, the female employers. So this is a kind, and construction workers, it is the worst. So working condition, as far as the working condition in the new normalcy, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe because of the laws that you have already undergone, there is a challenge whether they will be. So with these words, I now expect the participants to have any clarifications and observations to make. Somita, you are able to see the box, chat box?
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah. Is there any questions?
No, there's no question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Is there?
Okay.
Shall I read the questions, ma'am?
Yeah.
Sorry, then.
Please.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. At the time of unlinear migration, what kinds of problem arise, particularly women? This is a question asked by Pushpa Krishnan.
Sorry, 1 minute. Will you
Can
say
you
again?
Shall I repeat?
repeat
Shall I
the
repeat,
question?
ma'am?
Neela? Please.
At the time of
Yeah.
unilinear migration,
Yeah.
what kinds of problem arise, particularly women?
Oh, okay. Very good. Yes, that's a very, very good question. Let's see, the thing
Yeah.
is that, so if we go back to classical thinking, say if we take Marx, then what is Marx saying? That when you are removed from all means of production, you are proletarianized, and then you become subject to the oppression of the labor market because you have nothing to sell but your labor. So this process, the rural-urban migration is often that kind of a process. It's simultaneous with proletarianization. However, if you don't have a unilinear, if you don't have urbanization in that sense, if you retain your village base, then you're actually not proletarianized. You combine the rural and the urban in your livelihood strategy. And the rural can often be a buffer against the urban labor market. And we have just seen the opposite. We've just seen that, but the opposite can also happen. That the urban is a buffer in the rural livelihood option. But when you lose the rural, then you are proletarianized and you become totally dependent on the urban labor market, and that is even more difficult for you than the circular migration. And that is in fact what we saw women facing in that unilinear migration scenario. That women became more proletarianized. They did not have the option. If something happened in the urban labor market, they did not have the option to go back to the village. And this is because single women who migrated were already marginalized in their rural households. They were usually either deserted women or widows or women who were running away from their households for some reason, from their family. So that is why there is a combination of social and economic migration in that kind of migration that I talked about. That is actually very, very important to make a distinction between that and the kind of circular migration we see today. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Yes,
hopefully. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
There is another.
Shall I?
Yes.
This is regarding the garment workers. Of course, you talked about domestic workers and this one, the construction workers. So as far as, of course, in Tamil Nadu, you all know that the hub, the textile hub, which is employing 3-4 millions of workers from outside, that is migrant workers, and they have already gone back, and some of them are only held back here. And there is another, of course, as you said, there are number of predictions about whether they will come back or they stay back and continue to work in their respective states. And in the near future, it is not possible because people who have gone there, they have their own harvest season and therefore they will be engaged. And this MNRGA is also there. And therefore, it is difficult for them to come back, the reverse migration or returning to back to their work. And this will have implications on both the sides, the demand and supply sides. And as a labor historian, what is your prediction?
Well, it's very clear actually. I don't any longer, I made my prediction in May, but now I don't need to make any prediction because you can see the pattern already kicking in, which is that in the first place, people go from village to city because there is a lack of livelihood option in the village. And if you look at the states from which people go in large numbers to other big cities in other states, of which West Bengal is one, Bihar, UP, you've seen now all the stories that are coming out. It is because these states don't have work for people that people go to cities in the first place. So this returning home has been very, very complicated for many people. The home has also been inhospitable. It's not as though the village has been, waiting with open arms for migrants to return. And many people who have not had hostility in the village context, nevertheless have found it very difficult to find work and to make ends meet. So you have a trickle back to the city, and this trickle is steadily increasing. So as I said, I don't any longer have to predict. There will be a return to workplaces, to cities. The same people may not return to the same workplaces. This is because it's highly informal. But there will be, once these the pandemic crisis abates, I would imagine there would be a return of a majority of the workers who have been involved in the reverse migration. But it will not matter, because history, you can't turn the clock back. Nothing ever becomes the same again.
Yes.
There will be change.
That is true.
There will be change, but this will not be, it does not mean that a large proportion of Indian workforce is relocating back in the village. I don't think that is the long-term consequence of what has been happening.
Okay. There are a couple of other questions also. Neela?
Yes, ma'am. Shall I read, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Is there any migration from animal by COVID-19? This is a question by Marudupandi sir. Any migration from animal?
Animal migration.
Yes.
Animal migration. Now, this is not my expertise. I'm sorry. I don't know animal migration very much. If you mean migratory birds and things, there has been a few studies, but this is not something I can tell you very much about.
Okay.
Okay. There is another question, ma'am.
I can see.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you can see him.
No, so say, Neela.
Yes, ma'am. Whether working women and non-working women get same stress during this lockdown? Who experience more stress?
I don't think stress. Yeah, I don't think you can measure stress by occupation. So in some cases, maybe working women face more stress. Some non-working women may also face stress or more stress. So stress is something that is a product of many elements in your circumstance and the person you are. So I don't think one should think in terms of whether you work or not. as leading to more or less stress. But yes, what you can see is that in a situation of lockdown, you have to work within spaces where you've never worked before. Many people have to do their very different kinds of work. So there is a tension about how you divide space. There are tensions of working women who are used to spending part of the day outside. Now people have to live in very small, restricted spaces. So yes, those things are causing a very different kind of stress from what we have earlier. No, not being at home was one kind of stress. Now being at home is another kind of stress. So I don't know how much you can say lockdown is a cause of stress, but yes, lockdown has its own effect in terms of stress.
Meena, there are other two questions, so we will combine together and take them as last questions. And I think the other questions have already been partially answered in the previous questions. So one is about Sayanida's thank Sumita for her presentation. And do you feel, she's asking, do you feel humanitarian impact of pandemic has raised middle class consciousness in addressing and ensuring domestic worker, within bracket, women's rights in private space? Is there a transformation of female master worker relation in a middle class family, or there is a possibility in future? This is one question.
Yeah. I know this is what I was saying, that there is a
very much.
There is a possibility, because I think for the first time women have faced two issues. Faced one, the issue of how dependent they are on paid domestic workers, and also the fact that they are dependent so much on paid domestic workers because there is so little sharing of domestic work among household members. So this idea that ultimately domestic work is the responsibility of the woman in the family, and that others will not do domestic work even if it is required, that has been underlined in this crisis, and this has shown women, middle class women, that if there are no domestic workers, they will have to do it. And I think, so hopefully for women who are working, women who have their own money, or even non-working women who have more control over resources, they may, I don't know if they will, but they may reward domestic workers better than they have done so far.
Okay. So one final question, from Shruti. She's asking, please throw some light on child labor condition of girls.
Yeah.
Shruti Banerjee. Yeah. You could see that question? Future occupation post-COVID. Yeah. Future occupation post-COVID who are migrants as domestic workers in big cities with a very poverty-ridden background.
Yeah. This is a very important question, because most underage child domestic workers tend to be live-in workers rather than part-time workers.
Yeah.
And in this condition of live-in, the situation for live-in workers has been very difficult because they have been locked into employer households. But there is there's a bigger worry. I mean, this is a passing thing. It's, the lockdown will pass. But the long-term worry is the economic impact of the pandemic, the loss of jobs, soaring rate of unemployment may lead to a huge escalation in trafficking of children. And domestic work has already emerged as one big sector in which trafficking of children, girl children, happens. So this. I would be worried about this. I would be worried that long term, you might see an escalation in trafficking. So also this is interesting because sex work has been very negatively impacted by the pandemic. And the focus of trafficking may shift away from sex work into other kinds of work. That is also a possibility in the short term, not in the long term perhaps, but in the short term. And there is a possibility that domestic work might be one of them. Yeah, that's it. Done.
Yeah. Now,
Yes, ma'am.
is there any other questions which participants are desperate to ask? They can raise hands. The one last question.
I saw a question by Paromita Shah.
Okay.
Where
Please.
she's saying, take on the middle class working woman working from home and increased work burden. Yes, this is the point I'm making, that their work burden is increasing because they are now working both at their paid job in the home and they are having to do the housework in the home in the absence of the domestic worker. So this is, and so working women are earning their own money. So in the long term, immediately in the lockdown conditions, you can't solve the problem. But in the future, when a slowly unlock happens, then will these women remember the hard work that domestic work involves? Will they remember how difficult it was to wipe the floor and clean the dishes and do everything? And will they then be more appreciative of the hard work the domestic workers do every day for them? That is the million-dollar question. We will know soon.
One last question, I think, from Amit Gautam, which is asking about what about the girl child education of migrant workers, more affected in this pandemic? What is your view?
Education.
It is about girl child education, migrant parents, girls' education.
Oh, okay. Migrant parents, children's education, girls or boys, is now a big issue because if you're moving from city to village and back again, in this process of mobility, there are many things that are a big casualty, and children's education is obviously one of them. However, we must remember that most schools are shut at the moment, and the long-term effect on school education of the pandemic is still a very, very open question. We don't know how this will work out. But children's education in general of this heightened mobility will obviously be very adverse, will be very negative. But there may be much bigger impact on education across the country, and we have to watch and wait.
Okay, we'll close, Sumita, by this.
Yes.
And so Neela will formally take to
Yes.
Dr. Shubha to propose vote of thanks. So I take this opportunity to thank Sumita for making herself available in this hour and really bringing the new dimensions. Many of us here might not have gotten to or read through those historical inputs, and also bringing the context of these two categories of workers in the new normal situation and their impact. And we only hope that there optimistically that there will be a different kind of a new normalcy, which will be hopefully positively helping these working class to back to their work. So with these few words, I thank you, Professor Soumitra, for being with us and sharing your thoughts. And now I leave it to Dr. Neela to take it forward.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your knowledge sharing session on the topic pandemic and the paradox of humility, the problem of domestic work. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, smarter than you think, and loved more than you will ever know. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your valuable presence and gracing this occasion. Thank you, ma'am. May I now
Dr.
thank you,
Shubha.
ma'am. Thank you.
And Shubha will propose the formal vote of thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
May I now request Dr. S. Shubha, Assistant Professor, Department of Women's Studies, Badasni University, Trichy, to render the vote of thanks.
Thank you for invitation. On behalf of the organizers and participants, I thank Professor Savitri to share the in-depth knowledge and information about the domestic work under the COVID situation, and also explore the issues of migrant workers, and migration pattern of migrations, and existing gender issues in migration patterns, and also narrated the evolution of domestic work in Bengal context. Thank you so much, madam. And also we thank very much to clarify the queries and question of the participants. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I take this opportunity to thank all the participants for their active listening. Thank you all. Meet you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Will you leave?